There are a lot of differences between American criminals and the English variety. It's not just the guns, which America has always had in abundance, while British gangsters have not infrequently been reduced to beating each other with hammers. It's also the taste for publicity. In America, gangsters tend to like a low profile. Sure, there have been a few top names like Joe Bonanno and Lucky Luciano, who went as far as to write their memoirs late in life, but usually the only ones to do that are the ones who've already turned state's evidence. Not so in England, where for decades, criminals have sought careers as significant public figures who don't just write memoirs but appear on talk shows, films, advertisements, even give guided tours of famous crime sites. Sometimes they don't even wait until their criminal careers have concluded before making efforts at popular fame. Famous English gangsters have seen their post-criminal careers as celebrities as more than just a way to turn a few legal quid. For them, it's more like a kind of working retirement. Let's begin here with this cheerful chap. Looks a nice enough fellow, bit of a grandfatherly air about him. Meet, if you will, Francis Davidson Fraser, which no one except judges, prison guards, or his mom ever called him because everyone else knew him as Mad Frankie Fraser. He spent over 40 years in prisons and was named the most dangerous man in Britain by 2 Home Secretaries, although, well, he still seems a bit on the grandpa side. What is he, about 5'4"? What's so mad about him?
Well, after being certified 3 times, I can't expect to be called fucking sane, Frankie, can I?
Fair enough. So how exactly does one go about getting certified insane? Again, we'll have Frank explain.
I had a lovely drink down the Astor Club, Berkeley Square, London. A fight broke out down there, nothing to do with me. The police were called, I quietly paid me bill and left. And when I got out waiting for my driver to come round and pick us up, Eric Mason come up and said, wait till I tell Reggie and Ronnie, you caused that fight. Words like that. In our world, that was unforgivable. And when the car arrived, I kidnapped him, slung him in the car, took him to our one-armed bandits, Atlantic Machines, and done it with an axe. Really done it. And on one occasion, he put his hands over his head and the axe went right through his fingers and nailed his hands to his head. It was a lovely axe, an old boy in Harrods.
You don't need to do that sort of thing more than once before they start calling you Mad Frankie. He started out working for the Sabinis, who controlled the racetracks before the war, wound up in prison. Then later on, after getting out of prison, he became bodyguard and enforcer for Billy Hill, the post-war godfather of London. He slashed Hill's rival, Jack Spot, and went back to prison. When he got out this time, he was recruited, as one might a star athlete, by the soon-to-be infamous Richardson brothers, also known as the Torture Mob, which is what they were called after being accused in court of nailing people's feet to the floor and attaching electrodes to their testicles and pulling out teeth without benefit of anesthetic. By the way, here's what Mad Frank had to say about that.
I only wished it had been true, because at least when I was doing my 20 years, wouldn't it have been lovely lying in my cell and going, oh, what a good job I made of that back molar, but it wasn't true.
Mad Frank went down and went to prison along with the Richardsons over the aforementioned torture, which turned out to be the most lurid trial for grievous bodily harm in British history. This time he went away for 20 years, during which time he was beaten regularly for offenses like leading the Parkhurst riot. He lost every day of his remission. He came out of prison in 1985, 62 years old and lacking much in the way of marketable skills. And it was at the suggestion of his old colleague, Charlie Richardson, that the press began to go after Frank for some old gangster anecdotes.
I didn't make up for long because only about a month or so later I'm at the Old Bailey, getting a town hall down in Benfleet in Southend, getting all the clothing and petrol fumes. And you never believe this. We chased all the way from Rodin Bridge in Barking right to Rob Rife Tunnel, where we ran out of petrol. All the police cars are there chasing us. And God stow me, their cars run out of petrol and all. But the only bogey was we got caught, but two were lucky. They knew that not far away there's stairs leading out. But that was great. 3 of us got captured. I go to the Old Bailey, get the 20 months, from which I got the 18 strokes of the cat later on.
With his former solicitor, James Morton, he wrote his autobiography, beginning a run of books including Mad Frank's London, Mad Frank's Diary, Mad Frank and Friends, Mad Frank's Britain. Discovered the central irony of the celebrity criminal, that there's much more money to be made in talking about crime than in committing it. At least in Britain, they love a criminal, unless he's actually beating or stealing from you at the time. Entertaining chat about one's past exploits, however, always a crowd pleaser, which was why Mad Frank's next project was to set up a coach tour of famous London crime spots, and who better? So come on along with Frank. See the Blind Beggar pub where Ronnie Kray shot George Cornell. See the Peckford Scrap Metal Yard where Charlie Richardson used to torture people. See Mr. Smith's nightclub, where Fraser caught a bullet in the most famous gang fight in modern British history. And, of course,
We're going to go to Turnmills. That's where I was shot. In the head. Terrific shot.
and it didn't stop there for Frank. Unique among our selection of villains, Mad Frankie Fraser carved out something of an acting career in his post-prison years. Here he is playing the Godfather in Hard Men.
Fucking amateurs! I send you to collect the cash, and you kill half the town. Fucking amateurs.
And as the husband in A Man Alone. BBC News satire Brass Eye loved to get Frank on.
This is the Frankie Fraser madometer, right? So it's a low miff down here, and mad as a lorry up that end, and all the stages in between. Being grassed up to the filth.
That would have to go up here.
Right up here. OK, now I'm interested to see what happens now. Reading about a pervert who interferes with the kids.
Well, if you had another one further along here...
So that can go actually off the scale?
Yeah.
All right, now I just want to...
Anything go with him.
And needless to say, anytime the news needed a talking head to discuss the plight of old gangsters, Mad Frank was always happy to oblige.
Devastated by the news of Ronnie Kray's death, Frankie Fraser joins me in the studio, together with another Kray family friend, Marilyn Wisby. Frankie, first of all, I mean, it's trite to say it, but the news has come as a shock to you, hasn't it?
Well, it has come as a shock, but maybe not as a shock. As the number of drugs they was pumping into him at Broadmoor, sedating him, he had the constitution of a horse. It's a miracle how he survived so long.
Given the decidedly rough life he'd lived, it is interesting that Fraser outlived most of his contemporaries, making well-documented appearances at the funerals of one-time rivals as well as old allies. Eventually, age 90, he hosted a very well-attended funeral of his own. And as to his final destination, we'll let Mad Frank have the last word.
A lot of people ask me, what are you going to say, Frank, when you meet your maker? I have to be honest and say there's no danger of that happening. I've already been booked up. I've got the Chief Stoker's job down below.
The 20th century concept of the British gangster as popular cultural figure probably dates back to just after the Second World War and the then king of the London underworld, Billy Hill. Hill had long controlled London, especially the West End and the racetracks, in partnership with another powerful criminal figure, Jack Spot. But once they'd inevitably fallen out, one of Hill's means of retaliation was to get a tame journalist on side, in his case, one Duncan Webb, the prominent crime reporter for The People. You know, The People, the paper with bottle. Available at Butlins, with everything you need to know about the teddy boy horror haunting Britain today. Webb was no flunky either. He was considered the most important crime journalist of his time, and he had no sympathy whatsoever for criminals, unless, of course, they were Billy Hill, which meant that Webb deployed miles of ribbon, pounding out story after tense, gut-wrenching story about what a complete and utter bastard Jack Spot was. Not surprisingly, it wasn't long before Jack Spot lured Duncan Webb into a dark alley and beat the shit out of him. Webb, not surprisingly, sued him, and not surprisingly, won. At the height of his power and fame, Billy Hill was seeing his name dropped in popular films.
What's that lounge suit doing here? It's King of Galardia. Don't care if it's Billy Hill. We aren't having lounge suits here.
He really shifted into high gear when he had Webb ghost his autobiography, very modestly entitled Boss of Britain's Underworld. He even hosted a star-studded launch party which had the Sunday Times clutching its pearls, claiming that the event made even Soho gasp. The guests included Sir Bernard and Lady Docker, former CID officials, and many of London's scar-faced underworld. And other guests apparently included Soho Ted, Bugsy, Groin Frankie, Ruby Sparks, Mad Frankie Fraser, College Harry, Franny the Spaniel, Cherry Bill, Johnny Rico, and Russian Ted. Hill himself did eventually actually retire, a wealthy man, living in Tangier in the south of Spain and eventually winding up back in London, where he was finally done in by the capstans he couldn't stop smoking, no matter how hard he tried. And he spent more than a bit of his twilight years serving as mentor to a pair of savagely violent brothers from East London even he found frightening. Two men for whom criminal success was always and primarily a means to fame and the creation of a legend. Submitted for your consideration, Ronnie and Reggie Kray. The Kray twins were born in London's East End in 1933, years before the East End was bulldozed in post-war urban renewal. Growing up in the relic of a dying community amid a dying Dickensian way of life was very much a part of that legend of theirs I mentioned. But this array here is just a sample of the books written by and about the Kray twins, ranging from autobiography to biography to the memoirs of their mother's hairdresser. From the very beginning, Ronnie and Reggie Kray were deeply concerned with their image and with their legend. They wanted to be remembered as folk heroes and local Robin Hoods. The Krays, unlike the majority of criminals in history, wanted to be famous. And by the Krays, I mean Ronnie. Unlike his brother Reggie, a promising boxer who'd been sidetracked by crime and found himself reasonably proficient at it, Ronnie was a paranoid schizophrenic who preferred violence even to profit and was very much the Doug Piranha of the pair. Yes, that's right, the Krays joined Margaret Thatcher, David Frost, and the Queen on the short list of living people parodied by Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Even Dinsdale was frightened of Doug. What did he do? He used sarcasm. All the tricks, dramatic irony, metaphor, pathos, puns, parody, litotes, and satire.
Of course, Ronnie Kray didn't use sarcasm. He and his brother tended towards knives, guns, and the occasional fireplace poker. It worked well for them. And when the writer they'd personally commissioned to write their autobiography finally published it, he called it The Profession of Violence. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Unlike the others on our list, the Krays most certainly did not wait until they'd put their criminal career behind them to pull themselves into the limelight. For instance, let's talk about that biographer of theirs. They sought out and engaged the services of John Pearson, who'd previously written the biography of Ian Fleming. The experience wound up causing him considerable trouble, but not because of any reluctance on the Krays' part. They put him up in a suitably dismal flat in the East End, took him out to pubs full of the sorts of local characters that writers enjoy describing as Dickensian, as I have, and to other pubs patronized by their fellow criminals, charming and otherwise. Ronnie Kray himself could be both. In Pearson's words,
I remember how, as part of my research, Ron said he'd show me how to kill a man. A macabre demonstration followed in which, before I could refuse, he had placed his boxer's arms around my neck and with practiced expertise and undistinguished enjoyment started squeezing. It happened very quickly. The blood rushed to my head and just as I was on the point of passing out, Reg intervened with the memorable request, "Ron, for Christ's sake, stop! He's got to write our fucking book!" Fortunately for me, Ron did as he was told.
By the way, that wasn't the only trouble I was talking about. In fact, what lost Pearson his initial contract and newspaper publication deals was that in addition to the many acts of grievous bodily harm and murder he described in his book, he also talked about Ronnie Kray's relationship with Lord Boothby, the Tory peer with whom Ronnie shared a number of sleeping companions. He'd also put on a few orgies for his lordship's benefit, and Boothby, in his turn, took Ron to lunch at the peer's dining room at Westminster. When this relationship threatened to become front-page news, courtesy of the Daily Mirror, the response was a rare bipartisan front to shove the story deep under the carpet and force the Mirror not only to apologize, but to pay Boothby damages, £40,000, most of which wound up in Ronnie Kray's pocket. It was things like this that made the Krays memorable and Pearson's book unpublishable. When it finally was released, with all the Boothby information carefully and completely deleted, the Krays absolutely hated it, mainly because it told their actual story, which clearly looked pretty brutal when laid out on the printed page. But they changed their minds later on when The Profession of Violence set a record as the most read book in all of Her Majesty's prisons. After the Bible, of course. The book helped to keep their fame alive, and to that extent, they very much approved. But speaking of prison, and why not, it was in prison, of all places, that the Krays' quest for fame really took off. Now, for most people, a long stretch in prison means an end to whatever they happen to be doing at the time. That's what prison is. By definition, it's a place of stasis and boredom, where dreams go to die. Unless, of course, you're Ronnie and Reggie Kray. One of the first endeavors the incarcerated Krays lent their name to was an outfit called Krayley Enterprises. Perhaps ironically, this was a security firm run by their brother Charlie, but very clearly backed by the reputation of the other two rather more intimidating Kray siblings, which provided bodyguards for celebrities. Among their customers, this legitimate businessman used their services while visiting the UK to keep fans from, getting under his skin, doobie-doobie-doo. Granted, this does sound a bit like the Rolling Stones hiring the Hells Angels as concert security, but there are no reports of any Krayley representatives beating anyone with a pool cue. Of course, this was only one of the many things they got up to behind bars. There was also the merchandising, and this has to be a first. T-shirts, cigarette lighters, tea mugs. You could be the first on your block to have a Kray-themed birthday party, if that was the sort of thing you liked. And Ron and Reg would feel very pleased if you did. We've had plenty of violent criminals in the United States, and how none of them managed to turn the big coin selling commemorative trinkets is really beyond me, and Gacy's clown paintings don't count. How is it that there's no such thing as Charles Manson shampoo? Or a Richard Speck memorial plate like the ones they do for Dale Earnhardt? Did racist Mancunian pop sensation Morrissey do a song about them? Mancunian pop sensation Morrissey did do that thing. In 1991, their pursuit of fame reached its apotheosis, as the Krays got to see the fulfillment of two of their lives' ambitions, to get a movie made about them, and to get paid a large amount of money for it. The fact was, however inexplicably, the longer they were in prison, the more the great British public was willing to revere the Krays, seeing them, again, however inexplicably, as symbols of a better time. You know, when people didn't have to lock their doors and women and children were safe on the streets and, ooh, they did love their mum.
You know, kids were very different then. They didn't have their heads filled with all this Cartesian dualism.
If you ever doubt that society's desire heroes, just look at the desperate lengths they'll go to create them. But is there more? Of course there's more. There's always more, thanks in large part to television. Because you'd be hard-pressed to find any surviving member of the Kray firm who hasn't made a small career out of appearing in documentaries and chat shows. Albert Donahue turned Crown's evidence after Ronnie Kray tried to get him to take the rap for a murder, but he's got a book out, hell, he's got 3 books out, and has been a familiar face on any of the half-dozen or more documentaries about the Krays. The same goes for the Lambriano brothers, Chris and Tony, who did 15 years for not grassing up the Krays. Chris has his books and appearances, and Tony not only did likewise, here he is on Kilroy, but he also did a number of speaking tours and wrote a book with this man. This is Freddie Foreman, or as you'd likely address him if you met him in person, Mr. Foreman. He was, and presumably still is, also known as Brown Bread Fred, brown bread being Cockney slang for dead, and dead being a likely result of running afoul of Mr. Foreman in his heyday. Foreman was known as the managing director of British crime. Bob Hoskins' character, Harold Shand in The Long Good Friday, he was based on Freddie Foreman. And besides helping the Krays dispose of some bodies and killing at least one man for them, he was also behind the 1983 Security Express robbery, at the time the largest cash robbery in British history. So what do men like this do when they give up crime? Well, in 2000 they picked up a gig modeling shirts for Pink, the otherwise very conservative haberdasher, and were people pissed. As the Daily Telegraph reported,
the Police Federation, which represents rank-and-file officers, said it was concerned by any former criminals making money from their crimes. Their concerns were echoed by the charity Victim Support, which said such advertising tended to glamorize crime. A spokesman said that the advert reflected the general trend for the media to concentrate on the perpetrators of crime and ignore the victims. This is a part of a much bigger picture in which every night there are true crime programs on television that focused almost entirely on the criminals.
Foreman published his autobiography, Respect, in 1997. But with that done, the book started to pour out. Getting It Straight with Tony Lambriano in 2001, The Godfather of British Crime in 2009, The Last Real Gangster in 2015, not to be confused with The Last Gangster by Charlie Richardson, suggesting at the very least that one of them was probably the penultimate gangster. Oh, there was Running with the Krays in 2017, and that's not to be confused with Billy Webb's book of the same name, which came out in 1996. As I mentioned earlier, pretty much anyone who ever knew the Krays in any way wrote a book about it, so the title overlap is to be expected. Also in 2017, Foreman came out with something rather unusual for the genre, a book of photographs. Everything from him on the run in Spain to posing as an old man with Tom Hardy, who played the Kray twins in Legend, a film on which Foreman served as a consultant. He was also in the marvelously entitled autobiographical documentary How to Rob a Bank, along with great train robber Bruce Reynolds. And it's not just his own crimes that get Foreman's face on the box. As one of the greatest living authorities on British crime, he also appeared in Dome Raiders, along with the ubiquitous Tony Lambriano, about the failed diamond robbery at the Millennium Dome in 2000. This year, 2018, Foreman and director Paul Van Carter have come out with Fred, a documentary about Foreman's life. Unlike so many of the films that get made about these old villains, Fred depicts a man looking honestly, somberly at his past, seeking redemption. In a way, Foreman really was the last gangster by dint of plain survival. He has outlived nearly all of his contemporaries, and of all the men we've discussed here, he and Chrissy Lambriano are the only ones still breathing. So, naturally, Foreman has also taken turns on the stage, not only with the late Tony Lambriano, but also with an entirely different type of criminal, one who had nothing to do with the Krays, never killed anyone, and boasted the decidedly non-threatening nickname of Mr. Nice. And how do you get a nickname like that? Well, in large part it was because our man bought and used a false passport in that name, but it also probably had something to do with being the biggest cannabis smuggler in history. Which is pretty nice, as crime goes. Meet our last retiree, Mr. Foreman's friend and completely legal collaborator, Howard Marks. It is estimated that in the 1970s and 80s, Howard Marks was responsible for around 10% of the cannabis traffic in the world. Of all the criminals we've discussed, he is unquestionably the most successful and, by all accounts, never fired a shot. But when you really are the world's biggest dope dealer, check out the various modes of appearance. I like this one especially. The odds are excellent that you will eventually attract the attention of people with accents remarkably similar to my own. In Marks's case, the American accent belonged to one Kray Lovato, a DEA man who made it his life's work to bring Marks to justice. Or rather, to prison. Which is how Howard Marks, Oxford-educated international jet-setter, wound up spending 7 years in a maximum security prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. You know, Terre Haute, Indiana. It's sort of the America of the United States, and other than one of the meanest prisons in the country, it's mainly famous for its legacy as a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. Perfect spot for a posh European dope dealer, although in fact Marks did just fine there, palling around with mafia dons, befriending some of the more violent cons, helping them get their high school equivalency, and generally being a model prisoner. What else would you expect from the world's nicest criminal? That 7 years he did, it was supposed to be 25. Oh, and according to Marks himself, he still got the occasional Christmas card from some of the mafia guys he knew there. I am telling you, Howard Marks, world-class, old-school, nice. Now, after observing the behavior of our other retired villains, it will doubtless come as a complete shock to learn that the first thing Marks did once he was out of prison was to write a book. Mr. Nice, his autobiography, came out in 1996, followed by the self-explanatory Howard Marks Book of Dope Stories in 2001. And in case you didn't know that Marks was related to the pirate Henry Morgan, you could learn all about it in Senor Nice, which came out in 2006. And he even turned to fiction, albeit based on the facts of a famous Welsh murder case, in his 2011 thriller, Sympathy for the Devil. Book readings led to a long-running one-man show consisting of autobiographical dope tales mostly, sometimes in curious conjunction with fellow former criminals like Dave Courtney or our man Freddie Foreman. And there was cinema. Marks managed to draw the occasional paycheck, if never any Oscars, for subtle art house classics like Killer Bitch and Dirty Sanchez, as well as rather more upscale fare like Human Traffic and I Know You Know. And so far so familiar, you know the drill by now. Mad Frankie Fraser does Campari ads, Reg Kray publishes poetry, Howard Marks collaborates with popular 90s rock band. Yes, Marks had plenty of pop culture moments just like the rest, but he doesn't stand out for any of this. Rather, what sets Marks apart from the rest is that he's the only one to have gone heavily into political activism. Howard Marks stood for Parliament in 1997 as a single-issue candidate. You'll never guess what issue that was. He contested 4 seats at once, which is apparently possible. Norwich North, Norwich South, Neath, and Southampton Test. Didn't win one of them. Took roughly 1% of the vote. But it did lead to the Legalized Cannabis Alliance being founded, which eventually became cannabis law reform. The downgrading of cannabis in Britain from a Class B to a Class C drug is attributed in part to their efforts. So there's that. He applied to be Tony Blair's drug czar. Didn't get the job, can't guess why not. And he was a constant presence at events promoting the legalization of cannabis, especially in Britain, where his appearances included the massive legalization rally at Trafalgar Square in 1998. For a period of our history, it was almost physically impossible to hold any event related to cannabis without Howard Marks being a featured performer or guest. Shortly before he died in 2016, Marks released his final book, Mr. Smiley, My Last Pill and Testament. It's a tale of smuggling ecstasy in Spain and, not incidentally, of being diagnosed with incurable cancer. Although mainly it's about smuggling ecstasy in Spain. The Howard Marks story is remarkable, not least because of his relentless single-mindedness. It puts me in mind of that speech at the end of The Grapes of Wrath.
Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. And when the people are eating the stuff they raise and living in the houses they build, I'll be there too.
What Tom Joad was to the plight of the oppressed American worker, Howard Marks was to getting stoned. Wherever there's a white guy with dreadlocks smoking a joint the size of a human arm, Howard Marks is there. Wherever there's a kid smoking a bowl behind the gym instead of going to class, Howard Marks is there. And every time someone loses their keys in Amsterdam, Howard Marks is there.